The sound of the washing machine hummed low in the background, a steady rhythm that filled the silence of the house. It was late afternoon, sunlight spilling in golden streaks through the kitchen blinds, catching dust in the air and laying it gently across the tiled floor. I had been at my aunt's house since the morning, sent there by my parents with a casual request. She needs some help around the place. Be useful for once. I didn't mind. My aunt's home always had a different kind of warmth to it. The smell of detergent mixed with the faint aroma of brewed tea, the wooden furniture gleaming with polish, the air always carrying some subtle trace of lavender. It felt lived in, familiar, comfortable in a way my own house sometimes wasn't. When she called me into the laundry room, I thought nothing of it. "Can you help me with this basket?" she asked, her voice muffled slightly over the low roar of the dryer. I found her there, standing with one hand resting on the edge of a wicker basket filled with clothes. She was dressed casually, jeans and a blouse that clung slightly as she bent forward to pull out a bundle of freshly dried laundry. Her dark hair was pinned up, but a few strands had fallen loose, brushing against her face. "Sure," I said, stepping forward. The basket was heavier than I expected, warm from the dryer, the fabric inside radiating a faint heat that smelled clean, crisp, like sunlit cotton. I followed her into the living room where she set the basket down on the couch. "Let's fold these," she said, tugging out a towel and snapping it into the air before folding it neatly in half. I grabbed a shirt and tried to mimic her precision, but my folds were clumsy, uneven. She glanced at me and let out a quiet laugh, not unkind. "You're not much of a perfectionist, are you?" I shrugged, grinning sheepishly. "Guess not." Her smile lingered a moment longer before she turned back to the pile. We worked in a rhythm, the sound of fabric unfolding and folding filling the silence. Every so often she would correct the way I was doing it, brushing her hand over mine to adjust the crease, or shaking her head softly before refolding a towel I'd stacked too carelessly. Each correction carried no edge of frustration, only patience, as though she didn't mind taking the time to show me. The late afternoon light deepened, painting the room in warm tones. The basket slowly emptied, stacks of neat piles forming on the coffee table. The quiet felt different now. Not empty, but weighted with something I couldn't name. "You're a good helper," she said suddenly, her voice softer than before. I glanced up at her. "I'm just folding laundry." Her lips curved into a small, almost knowing smile. "Sometimes it's not about what you're doing. It's about being willing to do it." The words sat between us, heavier than the folded clothes. I nodded slowly, not sure how else to respond. She pulled another shirt from the basket, smoothing it across her lap with careful hands. Her eyes focused on the fabric, though her tone carried a different weight now. We kept folding in silence for a while, but my thoughts weren't on the clothes anymore. They were on her voice, her presence, the way the quiet felt charged when it was just the two of us. Something about that ordinary task seemed to blur into something less ordinary. And as the last pieces of clothing remained in the basket, I realized that what started as a simple chore was beginning to feel like something else entirely. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to change. The pile of clothes on the coffee table grew taller, the basket nearly empty now. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of fabric being smoothed and folded, the low hum of the dryer still vibrating in the background. Outside, the light dimmed as the sun sank lower, strips of orange cutting through the blinds and casting long shadows across the carpet. My aunt picked up one of her blouses from the basket, holding it up against the fading light for a moment before folding it slowly, almost absent-mindedly. Her fingers lingered on the fabric, tracing the edges as though lost in thought. She didn't look at me at first, but when she did, her eyes stayed on mine longer than usual, and it unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite explain. "You're really not bad at this," she said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. I gave a small laugh. "Folding laundry isn't exactly rocket science." "No," she agreed, her smile faint. "But still, most wouldn't bother. They'd rush through it, do a sloppy job, or pretend not to notice when I asked. You don't." I shrugged, feeling suddenly warm under her gaze. "Guess I don't mind helping." Her eyes lingered, and then she looked back at the blouse in her hands, folding it neatly and placing it on the pile. But the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It was thicker, heavier, as though something unspoken had slipped into the room. She reached into the basket again, pulling out another piece of clothing. This time it was more delicate, a silk camisole. She smoothed it carefully, laying it flat across her lap, and for the first time I felt a hesitation in my hands, unsure if I should keep folding the towel I'd picked up or just sit still. "Some things," she murmured almost to herself, "are easier when no one else is around." Her tone was different now, quieter, more deliberate. I looked up, uncertain. "What do you mean?" She paused, her fingers smoothing the edge of the fabric one last time before setting it down. Then she lifted her gaze to mine again, her eyes steady, serious. "I mean," she hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she said, "You don't tell anyone about this." The words landed with a weight that made my chest tighten. My hands froze over the half-folded towel. "What?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. She leaned back slightly against the couch, watching me, her expression unreadable. "This?" she repeated, gesturing faintly at the clothes between us, at the quiet, at the moment. "You helping me, you staying here with me like this. It's just between us. Understand." My throat was dry, but I nodded. "Yeah, I understand." Her smile was faint, almost secretive. "Good." The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty house. It was charged, layered with the knowledge that something had shifted. The simple act of folding laundry no longer felt simple. It felt like something else, something heavier, as though a door had been quietly closed behind us. We finished the last of the basket in silence, but my thoughts were spinning. Every time her hand brushed mine as we reached for the same piece of fabric, every glance that lingered just a little too long, every pause in her voice, it all felt magnified, like the room itself was holding its breath. By the time the basket was empty, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about laundry anymore. It was about the secret she had just sealed between us. The basket sat empty now, only the faint smell of fabric softener clinging to the air as proof of the work we'd just done. Neat piles of folded towels, shirts, and linens filled the coffee table, stacked so perfectly they almost looked staged. My aunt smoothed her hands down her lap and leaned back into the couch cushions with a quiet exhale, as though the simple task had taken more from her than she wanted to admit. I hovered awkwardly for a moment, unsure of what to do with myself. Normally, this would have been the end of it. Task finished, job well done. I'd grab my bag and head out. But the way she'd said it, "You don't tell anyone about this," still echoed in my head, turning the air heavier, almost charged. She reached over and picked up one of the folded shirts, running her fingers across the crease as if testing the sharpness of the fold. "Not bad," she murmured, glancing at me with the faintest smile. I might actually have to keep you around for this. I laughed nervously, scratching the back of my neck. Guess I found my true calling. Her smile deepened for a moment, then faded as she set the shirt back down. Her eyes lingered on me a little too long, and then she leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees, her hands clasped loosely together. You really do understand, don't you? She asked, her tone quiet but deliberate. My chest tightened. Understand what? That this stays between us. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it that made it feel more serious than any rule a parent or teacher had ever laid down for me. I swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah, I get it. Good, she said again, the same word she'd used before, but this time it felt different, heavier, like a seal being pressed onto something fragile. She leaned back against the couch again, her eyes drifting away from mine, scanning the room as if to make sure we were still alone. The dryer in the other room clicked off, and the silence that followed was deafening. You know, she said finally, her voice softer now, sometimes it's nice to have someone who doesn't run off, who doesn't complain, someone who just stays. I shifted my weight, my throat dry. I don't mind staying. Her eyes flicked back to mine, sharper now, searching. That's what I mean. You don't mind. The quiet stretched between us, and I felt my pulse hammering in my chest. She reached out then, almost casually, and picked up another shirt from the pile. Not because it needed folding, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She smoothed it across her lap, her movements slow, deliberate, as though the fabric itself was keeping her grounded. Sometimes, she said, her voice just above a whisper, you don't realize how much you needed the help until it's there, and then you don't want to let it go. The words carried more weight than laundry ever could, and I knew she wasn't just talking about clothes. Her hand stilled on the fabric, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes met mine again, steady and unflinching, and I felt the full force of the secret she'd wrapped around us. This wasn't just about helping her fold laundry anymore. It was about trust, about silence, about something that lived in the space between us, unspoken but undeniable. And as I sat there, frozen under her gaze, I realized that from this moment on, nothing between us would ever feel simple again. The living room felt different now. The neatly folded stacks of laundry were still there, sitting like monuments to the ordinary task we'd started with, but nothing about the air felt ordinary anymore. My aunt sat across from me, leaning back against the couch cushions, her eyes fixed on the clothes as though she was trying to convince herself that everything was still normal. But it wasn't. We both knew it. The silence stretched out too long. I fidgeted with the edge of one of the towels, tracing the seam with my fingers just to give myself something to focus on. Her words echoed in my head. You don't tell anyone about this. That simple phrase had shifted the ground beneath me. Finally, she spoke. Her tone was lighter now, but it felt like an effort. Well, she said, exhaling softly, you did a good job. I think I'll have to put you on laundry duty every time you come over. I smiled faintly, though it felt forced. Guess I don't have a choice anymore. She laughed, but it was short, the sound fading quickly into the heavy quiet of the house. You always have a choice, she said, her gaze flicking to mine, lingering there. But sometimes, it's better if you don't make the obvious one. I wasn't sure how to respond. The weight of her stare pressed into me, filling the space between us, until she finally looked away. She stood, smoothing her blouse with both hands, and began gathering the piles of clothes from the table. I moved to help, but she shook her head. "No, I've got it," she said. "You've done enough." Still, I rose from the chair, unable to sit still. I followed her into the hallway as she carried the folded stacks toward the linen closet. Her steps were unhurried, deliberate, like she was buying time with every movement. When she slid the last pile onto the shelf and closed the closet door, she turned back to me. The hallway light fell across her face, softening her features, but her eyes were sharp, steady. "You remember what I said?" she asked. I nodded immediately. "Yeah, I won't tell anyone." Her expression softened, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Good. I knew I could count on you." For a moment, she reached out as though to touch my shoulder, her hand hovering just inches away. But then she pulled back, folding her arms instead, as if reminding herself of something. "You should probably head home," she said quietly. I hesitated, but she didn't add anything more. So I nodded, murmured a quick, "Okay," and grabbed my bag from near the door. She followed me to the entryway, her footsteps soft behind mine. As I pulled the door open, the cool evening air rushed in, carrying the sounds of the neighborhood, distant chatter, a barking dog, the hum of a car passing by. The world outside was unchanged, ordinary. But inside me, everything felt different. I glanced back at her one last time. She stood in the doorway, framed by the light of the house, her expression unreadable. But her eyes were steady, as though sealing the unspoken pact between us one final time. "See you soon," she said simply. "Yeah," I replied, stepping out into the night. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked down the path toward the street. The evening air was cool against my skin, but my mind was still burning with her words, with the weight of the secret I now carried. It had started as laundry, just laundry, but it wasn't laundry anymore. It was a moment, a line crossed, a silence shared. And I knew, as I walked home under the fading light, that this wasn't something I could ever forget. Her voice followed me, echoing in my head. "You don't tell anyone about this." And I wouldn't, not ever.